Hello, and welcome to our last lecture. Yep, it's our last lecture, last chapter in Gen BIO-2, which is chapter 52, where we're going to be going over an introduction to ecology. Now, granted, the book does go on and covers a lot more things about ecology, things that I find actually quite fascinating. But we don't have all the time in the world to continue going over that. So let's go ahead and start talking about ecology. And if you'd like to learn more about ecology, I highly recommend taking an ecology course in which you will be learning this and, I assure you, much, much more. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it. So we just got done pretty much talking about biology overall. Now, granted, it was, looking at it like at, a mile-long stare, we hit a lot of major concepts, probably a little bit more deeply than, say, in a high school course, or maybe not, because I know there's some teachers out there that really hit some really great stuff hard, so if you had a great biology teacher in the past, go you! However, now we're going to take everything we've kind of put together in BIO-111 and BIO-112, and we're going to kind of look at it, how it all interacts together. And that's basically what ecology is. It's the study of interactions of living things with their environment. So again, it's basically taking everything we learned about genetics, energy movement, chemistry, some physics, because everything's based on physics and science, and colliding that all together, and how do we all interact? How does everything live? Because we live on a planet where everything is interacting with everything, and everything is related in some form or fashion. And I'm not just talking about, genetically. I'm talking about, I live in an environment where, I've got ants that are also living their good life, but unfortunately they might be trying to chew my house down. And how do you negotiate that? Granted, you could probably just be like, kill the ants, get the raid. But at the same time, raid then, sinks into the land, and the land, it goes into the runoff water, and that can get into the waters, our lakes and our rivers and our ponds and our streams, and that might, do some damage to another species we never intended to do. So that's, again, that's one way of looking at ecology, but there's also, learning about animals and their environment and how they survive. If you remember back when we talked about bacteria, there's some bacteria we just can't get them to grow in a lab because we do not know their ecology. We don't know how they interact. Therefore, when we try to grow them in the lab, they die every single time. And that's a lot of bacteria that we could be studying. That could be, if we study it, and you might be like, why study these things? It's like, literally, some of these things could come with a cure for a disease that, your family suffers from, or another family, suffers from. And it could be that, looking at them genetically and being able to study them in a lab might come about. And that's why sometimes crazy avenues of science that you might be like, why did we even do that? It's like, the Ozempic breakthrough came from studying lizards. Again, it's like, I've had people sit there and say, well, we did this one thing where we made a shrimp run on a little treadmill underwater. Why? And it was to see on how well they were doing using oxygen and whatnot, which leads into major breakthroughs in treating athletes, and then trickling down to us eventually. Somebody who can't breathe and use their oxygen very well. So these things, they may seem weird at the time why we're doing such research, but keep in mind a lot of this research is looking for something deeper that hopefully in the end comes back and benefits us in the long run. I know that's rather selfish of us as humans, but at the same time, sometimes that bounces back to mega benefits for us, but also gives us a wider view and making things better for other creatures as well that we are dependent on. As I hope you've seen throughout the thing, there's quite a few creatures we're dependent on, because if they leave, we're dead. So, anyway, one of the major goals of ecology is to understand the distribution and abundance of living things in their physical environment. So, how these guys all work together, Do they, work together? Do they not work together? We have different ways of denoting that. So let's look at the different levels of organization. So we've been talking about on and off, kind of bouncing back and forth between individuals, especially when we talk about genetics and whatnot, and populations. And we were definitely talking about populations at the beginning of this semester when we were talking about evolution and natural selection and how, life changes over time and all this fun jazz. So we've been talking about individual and populations quite a bit, but above that is community, where a whole bunch of populations are all interacting together. And then the ecosystem in which these communities are found. And there can be more than one a community hanging out in an ecosystem, because an ecosystem is actually kind of a big thing. And then pretty much that makes up the Earth's biosphere, which is the accumulation of everything that's alive on Earth. And being Earth, we have a lot of things that are alive. And personally, I'd like to keep it that way. It's kind of nice. So that's the biosphere. Now, if you ever took earth science in high school or, somewhere else, I used to like to split it out into the different spheres, like the lithosphere, which is, rocks and plate tectonics and all that fun jazz. And the atmosphere, which is all the gases that envelop our planet and actually protect us so we don't fry from the sun. And the hydrosphere, which can be split up into freshwater and marine. And hold on. There's another one. It's coming to me. And the biosphere is all the living things on it. Geosphere can kind of be thrown in with the lithosphere. Who am I not thinking of? Atmosphere, hydrosphere, geosphere. Biosphere is biology. There's a fifth one. I'm having a moment. Anyway, so let's go ahead and look at this from organisms on up to the biosphere. So researchers studying ecology at an organismal level are interested in the adaptations that enable individuals to live in specific habitats. These adaptations could be morphological, physiological, and behavioral. And this is a deep dive in and of itself, just to see how, a creature is in its niche, which is kind of like its own little corner of the ecosystem, and how it is completely tailored for that. Like, for instance, if you look at creatures that live in the water and how well they're adapted to the water versus those of us that live on land, and how it's a little hard for us to go back in the water sometimes. So, again, we've been kind of looking at the organism quite a bit here, there, all over this place from 111 to 112. Population, again, we've kind of started looking at that at the beginning of this semester a little bit more. Population, remember, is a group of interbreeding organisms that are members of the same species living in the same area at the same time. And remember, they can breed. So organisms that are all members of the same species are called conspecifics, and there's a reason for this. A population is identified in part by where it lives, and its areas of population may have natural or artificial boundaries. Think about people living in Hendersonville versus living in Asheville. We've got the city limits of what's Asheville and what's Hendersonville. And if you fall down the mountains in South Carolina, Greenville or whatever in Spartanburg, and in between those things. I'm just going for big spots here. So anyway, we've got in-jokes in Hendersonville that, if I told it to somebody living in, Greenville, they wouldn't have the same in-joke. Like, that one time, was it like earlier this year? There was that one person in a PT Cruiser that did burnouts in the Ingalls parking lot and at the Four Seasons. No, not the Four Seasons. Intersection of Howard Gap and 64, and that was like all over the internet for a while. And then for I think it was April Fool's, the Hendersonville Police Department put up a thing saying they got a brand new PT Cruiser for their fleet, which is like, is it the same one that was doing burnouts that one day? So anyway, there's things like Apple Festival. We know Apple Festival because, we've all been to it. maybe once or twice, and then you get over it, or not, or you go back every year because you like it. Things like that. Things we know because we have it. Like Brevard has, the White Squirrel Festival. It's what they're known for. Stuff like that. So, that's a population. Hendersonville is a population. And again, think of it like the populations of the 4 high schools. Same thing there, that's a population. And, usually you know about each other, but not as much as you do in your own school. Stuff like that. So anyway, the community ecology is a biological community. It consists of different species within an area, so several populations interacting, typically in a 3-dimensional space. And this is a big thing. We're going to be talking about biomes. But biomes are not just one level. There's actually, especially in tropical rainforests, there's actually vertical levels as well as, how we kind of think of it over an area. So this is a 3-dimensional space, so don't, go thinking, oh, it's flat. No, the planet is not flat, and neither are biomes. So anyway, community ecologists are interested in the processes driving interactions and their consequences. Ecologists also study the interaction between various species. Members of different species are called heterospecifics. Remember, hetero means different. So whereas con means similar. So there you go. Examples of heterospecific interactions include predation, parasitism, herbivores, competition, pollination. Mutualism is another form of a long-term relationship that is co-evolved between 2 species. Like there are certain plants that only a certain hummingbird can pollinate. Nothing else can pollinate that plant except this hummingbird. So if the plant dies, so does the hummingbird because they lose their food and they don't eat from other things. And same vice versa. If the hummingbirds are wiped out, that specific species, that the plants, there you go, because they won't be pollinated by anybody else and they'll be like no more babies. So mutualism is good and bad at the same time, because if you can get really specific between 2 species, they're dependent on each other, and in a way they're the weak link for each other. Other examples, like currently in community ecology, I know a lot of scientists are studying orca. I know I keep talking about them last few lectures, but they're fun. Because there was off of South Africa, there is a huge spot where if you want to go see great white sharks, it's a great place to go, because there is a huge population of seals. And the seals are all hanging out, and that's where they birth their pups, all that fun stuff. And until recently, the great whites would come up and, of course, pick off seals that were weak or too young or whatever. And so that's where you'd find a very large number of great whites interacting with the population of seals. And the two kept each other, balanced. Well, a couple of years ago, a pack of orca came in. Not exactly a pod. I don't know if it's a true pod, but it was definitely a group of young males. And they thought it was awfully funny to kill the great sharks and eat their livers. I told you last lecture, sharks don't taste so great, but apparently their liver is really yum to orca, so they like shark liver? Ugh. I don't know. Never had it. Couldn't tell you. Anyway. So, long story short, they thought it was funny to rip up the great whites. Well, without the great whites, the population of seals has just absolutely exploded on the coast of South Africa. And granted, the orca will eat the seals too. They're not picky eaters, but they're not picking them off like the great whites were. And now the great whites aren't in the area because they know, oh God, these crazy orca are here and they're going to eat our livers. So they scattered, they left. So their scientists are now watching, because this has nothing to do with humans. It just has everything to do with orca completely and utterly disrupting what has been kind of the natural status quo that we were always aware of in this area. So scientists are sitting there watching how that community ecology is completely changing because of the orcas kicking the sharks out, and then because there's not a lot of shark predation, the seal population is exploding, and are the orca going to now switch to eating seals, or are they going to move off and the sharks come back? We're all sitting there kind of watching what's going on with that, because it isn't just between sharks, orca, and seals. There's other things. Seals eat fish. There's a drop in the fish population. They have a lot of droppings. Or we're going to have a lot of, issues with, bacterial, and fungal growth. It's not just those three, but it's everything surrounding what's going on with those three. So it's a whole bunch of different species interacting with each other. So that's community ecology. Ecosystem ecology is an extension of organismal population and community ecology. So remember, an ecosystem is all the biotic components. Biotic means living things, and the abiotic things that we need to live. And I'm going to get into the big two in a bit, because when it comes to ecology, there's two big uns, and it's going to be on the final. Big uns. So the abiotic, or the non-living things of that area. And so some of the abiotic components include air, water, and soil. But there's another one that I haven't mentioned yet. One of the two is in these three I just said. I'll let you think on it for a minute. So anyway, again, the spheres of the Earth. Oh, it's the cryosphere. Now it came to me. So the geosphere, which is also known, you could also split it out into the lithosphere. And there's another layer to the geosphere. But basically, it's all the solid stuff that makes up the Earth. Rocks, the ground, all that fun jazz. The hydrosphere, which is all the water, which can either be the marine, which is salt water, or fresh water, which actually 1% of all the water on this planet is fresh. Everything else is salt. So it's amazing how much is salt water and only a little bit is fresh water. The biosphere, which is all living creatures on it, and the atmosphere, which is the gaseous cloud or gaseous envelope that surrounds our planet and protects us from solar radiation so we don't go, and we also breathe it. So, yay. You can also slap in, again, this would be part of the hydrosphere. The cryosphere is all the frozen things, but I'd take that and just go into the hydrosphere personally. But these are the spheres that make up the planet. So, again, what runs ecology? I said there's two biggies, and basically you can sit there and say, well, it's the abiotic factors, which is the non-living things, and the biotic factors, which is the living things, but whatever. The two things that run ecology that are abiotic are water and temperature, and you're going to see this over and over again in ecology. It all boils down to water and temperature. How much water does an area have, and what are the temperature ranges of that area? And that's basically how we're going to classify all of these biomes that I'm going to be talking about next. It's always down to water and temperature. Depending on where the water availability, you're going to see an increase in species number of populations. Temperature, same thing. If, the temperature is in with a range that they can, definitely survive, you're going to see an explosion. If the temperature is outside of a range that, most things really don't feel like it. Like, how we like it around 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Or at least I do. Ish. Give or take. So it's like outside of that, it's like I don't want to be burning, and outside of that, I don't want to be freezing, although I'd rather be burning than freezing, but that's just me. It's probably because, I'm a dang Yankee, and I'm so sick of the cold weather. Bleh. Anyway, so water and temperature. It always comes back to water and temperature. So again, this has to do with how we're in the Goldilocks zone around the sun. So remember, climate is long-term prevailing weather conditions in a given area. So this depends on many different things. Temperature, precipitation, how much rain do we get? Again, water, sunlight, which causes temperature, and precipitation, and wind, depending on how windy it is. Again, which depends on the sunlight. If you ever want to know why it's windy, blame the sun. The sun actually doesn't strike the earth evenly. All the energy doesn't strike the earth evenly, and because some areas get hotter and other areas get colder, the atmosphere gets roiled up and we get wind and storms and all that fun jazz. So, also things that affect the climate, seasons, like Hendersonville is called the town of 4 seasons because we are in a temperate zone. So therefore we get all 4 seasons. Now, if you move somewhere else, they may not have all 4 seasons. Like, my husband is originally from California and they have green and on fire. I'm pretty much thinking those are the 2 seasons. We should just rename them. Because technically that's what California's always been. Certain parts anyway. And I'm sure there's other places that we can talk about. Like, if we look at, Norway and everything like that, they definitely don't exactly have all 4 seasons either. Or they have truncated versions. So again, 4 seasons, yeah, that's great. That's definitely a sign that you're in a temperate zone, but outside of that, like Africa, it's got the rainy season and the dry season. There you go, that's it. All right, bodies of water. This is a major thing, especially if you've ever talked about the specific heat of certain objects. Now, water has an interesting specific heat in the fact that it can hold a ton of heat energy, which is, we've all noticed when we're boiling water to try and make food. Have you ever noticed that? You put a pot on the stove and you're like, I really need you to boil faster. And the water's like, I'll do it when I do it. And it's because water has the ability to absorb a ton of energy before it finally moves into switching to a different state. So going from liquid to gas, which is boiling. So water has an amazing ability to suck up and hold heat. And this is why, if you live near the coast, it's cooler than living inland. Because what happens is over the summer, the ocean sucks up a ton, or even any large body like, the Great Lakes, even, sucks up a ton of heat energy. And it's sucking up all that heat energy all summer long, which makes it cooler by these giant bodies of water, which is why everybody in the summer goes to the beach. However, it does the reverse in the winter, and it puts off all that, it releases slowly, all of that heat that it sucked up all summer long. And this is just a natural thing that water does. It's called specific heat. And that's why the temperature is warmer on the coasts than it is up in here in the mountains. That's why we get snow and the coast rarely gets snow. If the coast gets snow, they're all like, oh my gosh. And they go wild. So again, this is a major thing that affects climate. Are we near a large body of water that can store or release heat energy, making the surrounding temperatures of that area more stable? Mountains, again, we got some interesting abilities, especially if you look at our mountains. We're more like here in Hendersonville, I said it's a temperate zone, technically yes, but also in our mountains, it's more like the closest we got to a rainforest. We're the closest thing North America has to a rainforest is this area. And because it's just so hot and it's super rainy. Vegetation, because again, if you have a whole forested area, it'll be a lot cooler under the canopy than cooler under the leaves and whatnot. And, again, think about having a house out in the middle of a field. We've got no protection from any trees around of us. So therefore, our AC or heat pump or whatever is going on pretty crazy. But if we have trees around the house, you can sit there and say, but storms, but I'm not going there yet. With trees around the house, the trees give shade, therefore it doesn't cost as much to make your house cooler because we're covered in shade. So again, this has to do with energy bills too. If you've got, plenty of trees around your house, yeah, they give shade. So therefore you don't have to spend as much cooling down your house with AC. Whereas if you live in the freaking field and there's no shade and you got direct sunlight on your house every which way, it's going to cost more to cool and conversely heat that house. So, having vegetation around you is a major thing. So microclimates, this happens in a lot of interesting places. We've been finding more and more in microclimates. So it's a climate in a climate, depending on vegetation, mountains, bodies of water, and all that fun jazz. Now, how do seasons happen? Seasons happen basically because the Earth is tilted. So we are a tilted planet. We be tilted. So anyway, because we're tilted, again, sunlight doesn't hit the Earth equally. And because we're tilted, say like in December, that's why we're having winter, because we're tilted away from the sun. But the southern hemisphere is tilted toward, so they get summer. So yes, it's reverse. The seasons are in reverse. So while we're having winter, Australia is having summer. So they never have a white Christmas because they're in the middle of summer. You break your brain on that one. Anyway, again, if we're in March or something, notice that we're still tilted, but because we're kind of straight on, welcome to spring in the south, or spring in the north, fall in the south. And then we flip. So in June, because we're tilted towards the sun. So therefore, us upper half people, us northerners, are tilted towards the sun. Therefore, we have summer. And the southern hemisphere in Australia is tilted away, and they have winter in the summer. Oh. And then again, same thing happening in September, because we're kind of equalized. They're having spring and we're having fall. So now here's a crazy thing to even burst your brain. We're not completely equidistant around the sun. It's crazy to think that during the winter, or at least when the northern hemisphere is having winter, when we have winter, we're actually closest to the sun. January 2nd, I think, is when we're actually closest physically to the sun. The planet is physically closest to the sun. But because we're pointed away, we're having winter. Yeah. And then when we're having summer, we're actually physically furthest away from, which is around July 4th, interestingly enough. Crazy. Yeah. So we're having winter when we're closest physically to the sun. Astronomy is just wild, man. It's just wild. Anyway, so biogeography is the study of geographic distribution of living things and the abiotic factors that affect their distribution. Abiotic factors, the big ones is temperature and rainfall. Again, temperature and water. I'm going to be going over that. So, very based mainly on latitude and elevation. These abiotic factors change. The composition of plant and animal communities will also change. So, ecologists who study biogeographic examine patterns of species distribution, and an endemic species, one that's found only in a specific geologic area that is restricted in size. Other species are generalists. They can live pretty much anywhere. We're kind of a generalist. Because of our own innovations, we can kind of live anywhere and do. Yes, we actually do have, or at least, I want to say Chile has a little place down in Antarctica. I wouldn't suggest it, but they have a spot there where they have a little colony. I don't know why, but they do, because it's like, ugh, not exactly where I would like to visit. But anyway, maybe once just to check it out, but that's about it. I don't want to live there. But like I was talking about in the last lecture, possums. Possums are generalists. They're pretty much everywhere. They're, again, a stunning example of the one marsupial survivor amongst all of us mammals that took over all the other niches from all the other marsupials, and the only one left standing of the representing marsupials is the possum, who's standing there going, "I'm number one marsupial. I'm number one marsupial." Anyway. And all us mammals are looking at them going, "I guess." And then they hiss, and then you go, "Ooh." That way. Unless you have, I had a student who had possums for pets, and they look adorable. Anyway, when they're not hissing at you. So, there you go. All right. Now, where's all the energy to come from to run the planet? The sun is our number one energy source on this planet, the sun. The second energy source is actually from our own core. It's to a lesser extent, but because we spin and we're actually a giant electromagnet, the planet is a giant magnet, we have a magnetosphere, and that also protects us from the sun going. So, thank you, sun, for powering our planet. Without you, we'd probably be dead. So, but you also drive the weather and stuff, so, that's always a grab bag of things. There are other planets that we do think have life, and even though they're deeper on in space, we think because a lot like Earth, that they spin, they generate internal heat, so we might be seeing something like there's a moon called Enceladus, which has, we believe, a liquid ocean under a frozen top. So the ocean is actually frozen over on the surface of this moon, and we think there might be possibly microscopic life happening because the inside of the planet, or excuse me, the moon, is actually warm and spinning. And as long as it's warm and spinning, it could be giving enough energy to that liquid ocean in between core of the moon, liquid ocean, and the frozen surface is protecting it from space. So there might be somebody over there, which actually NASA is already sending a probe to, so we can kind of touch down and go, hi, knock, knock, and watch it get eaten by an alien. That would be me. Anyway, so energy from the sun is captured by green plants, algae. You know him, algae. Algae doing pretty much as all the plants together. Yeah, algae. Anyway, cyanobacteria and other photosynthetic protists. These organisms convert solar energy into chemical energy, and then we go eat them. So remember, eat your vegetables. Your mom wasn't wrong. Or your dad, if your dad told it to you. Anyway, either one of your guardianship type adult peoples. So anyway, so light availability is an important force directly affecting the evolution adaptations in photosynthesizers. And again, as much as I love the animal kingdom, and I do, I have to give it up to the plant kingdom, because without them, a lot of the things we know and love would not be here. So thank you, plant kingdom, even though you tried to kill us a couple of times by dorking around with your own chemistry, but hey, who hasn't tried to destroy the universe before? Anyway, now, under the ocean, though, there's a big fat difference because light does not penetrate down under the ocean very far at all. So in aquatic ecosystems, especially down at the bottom of the ocean, availability of light is not there. That's why it's called the abyss. There's actually literally called the midnight zone. I'm going to show you, I think I have it in these notes, but layers of the ocean, and how light just really doesn't get down terribly far. So, because again, plants need sun, or anybody who's doing photosynthesis needs sun to run that. Eat the sun. Down in the ocean, they don't do that. We have to eat hot, yummy chemical soup straight from the core of the planet. And that's pretty much what these guys do. And we have a number of adaptations that evolved to enable living things to survive without the light, like not having eyeballs, or having glowy sticks, like football fish, and, those little guys with a dangly bit that have a life cycle that is insane, that if I had more time I'd go into and make you all go, ooh, another reason why I'm thankful to be human. However, because of this, we have to stir things around because, eventually everything that dies, especially in aquatic environments, will filter down to the bottom and sit there and not do anything. And that's not great because that's a lot of nutrients that needs to be spread around for a whole bunch of creatures to live off of. And I'm not just talking, big things. I'm also talking the teeny things like plankton and whatnot, which feeds a ton of the big things. So we usually need some kind of, ocean moving it around. We got to mix it around. We got to stir it up. And that's where wind and basically Earth's rotation comes in to help us with that. And the fact that there's wind stress and then the water is actually displaced by the Earth's rotation. and it gives us an upwelling. It's called ocean upwelling. So basically we have underwater currents that go out and basically disturb the bottom of the ocean and spit it back up so it swirls around. And because of this, nutrients that were once contained in dead organisms can be reused by living creatures that wouldn't be down at the bottom. So, plankton can eat all that lovely debris, and then whales can eat the plankton, and everybody else, by the way. A lot of people eat the plankton. We don't. But we do eat things that eat the plankton, so yay. Anyway, so between wind and Earth's rotation, the oceans actually are not really always just sitting there looking serene. They're sitting there looking swirly, swirly. Now, what about freshwater systems like lakes? Well, even over at Blue Ridge's campus, we can actually see this in the lake pond thing that's on our campus, or any kind of lake pond thing. You can see that going on. And this is because, again, remember when I told you water absorbs heat? Water loves to absorb heat. Well, because water absorbs heat, you can actually get something called spring and fall turnover. It's called the thermocline. And if you've ever gone swimming in a lake, and I have, you've probably felt this thermocline in the summer when you've gone swimming. And I'm going to tell you what it is in a minute. Like, I used to go swimming all the time up in New York, where I grew up, in Lake Luzerne, and then in Sacandaga River Reservoir. And you can feel this, because I used to do diving. I have fins and snorkel. I love snorkeling. And I used to dive down. And in Sacandaga Reservoir, it was an area that used to be a town, and they turned it into a lake. They did that, down here in the South as well, quite a few places. There's no natural lakes in North Carolina. They're all man-made. So, sorry. So anyway, what happens is because of, during the summer, the top is getting warm, and the bottom stays cool. Eventually, when the seasons change, like usual, cold water sinks, warm water rises, we get a fall turnover. And the same thing happens from winter stratification. The top of it is usually around 32 degrees Celsius, freezes over in some cases, and it's really at the bottom, it's 39. Now, if you ever gone swimming and you felt the thermocline, have you ever gone swimming deep enough and it feels nice and warm, and then you'll feel that cold, sharp bit when you get further out into the lake or the pond or wherever you're going, the swimming hole. This is not for rivers and or streams, so they're always refreshing because they're always moving. So if you've felt that thermocline, you know what I'm talking about. You've been feeling warm water, and then all of a sudden you'll hit this feeling where it's cooler at the bottom half of your feet, and you're like, oh, that's weird. That's the thermocline. So because of these, this recycling between the air temperature and wind changes, the bottom of lakes are recycled twice a year, which is why spring and fall looks like mucky muck, because the turnover's happening and recycles nutrients and oxygen, and this is where we have a lot of explosions of critters with their life cycles, because this turnover at the bottom is coming back up to the top. And this is a huge thing to understand, that nothing is really sitting still in nature. And that includes all the water. And that's important. Now, again, getting back to temperature. Temperature affects the physiology of organisms as well as the density and the state of water. Temperature exerts an important influence on living things. Like, for instance, there's very few things that can live below zero. We don't. We do not. We really don't. Anyway, due to this metabolic constraints, it's also very rare for creatures to live at 113 Fahrenheit, because you might be on fire or turned into jerky. I'm not sure which. So, this reflection of the evolutionary response to typical temperatures, again, why? Because guys, we're warm-blooded, so that's why we can go out and survive in colder temperatures rather than Monty, who's cold-blooded. He can't come to Antarctica with me just to go, it's cold, and then say hi to an emperor penguin and then leave, because it's about as much as I'd get out of that trip. Monty, on the other hand, would die, because he's not warm-blooded, therefore again, this all comes back to supporting our metabolism. So reptiles are stuck in very, certain ranges that support their metabolism, whereas, us warm-blooded creatures can go outside of that, but still, it's all about homeostasis. So we've gone right back to homeostasis. And again, that's the name of the game in biology is always homeostasis. I even scream this when I teach anatomy and physiology. So again, therefore, organisms must maintain an internal temperature, or they must inhabit an environment that will keep them in an internal temperature that supports the running of their metabolism. Because if their metabolism shuts down, you don't have homeostasis. And remember, without homeostasis, you're dead. Please maintain your homeostasis. Thank you. So that's why temperature is such a huge thing. So how do we deal with temperature changes? Well, you could migrate, like birds. And occasionally Greenland sharks, apparently, and that just leave where they're supposed to be and head down south for no reason. So migration, so the regular movement from one place to another. A lot of creatures do this. Butterflies do it. Monarch butterflies do it. Birds, we all know about birds, especially Canada geese. They're always going back and forth and definitely coming down to North Carolina or staying in North Carolina or getting into a fight with me. They stole my bike when I was 9. There was a pack of them up where I was living, and I was riding my bike, and they came out and hissed and bit at my legs and stole my bike. I went home. I had to go get the pitchfork. Remember, I was raised on a horse farm, and I had to go beat them off my bike. Jerks. So, me and Canada geese, man. I'll fight him. Anyway, dispersal, movement of individuals or gametes away from an area of high population, area of origin. So again, it's getting too cramped. Therefore, it's literally what happened between, moving from the ocean to the land. The ocean was just too crazy populated. It was a ocean eat ocean kind of life down there. And creatures finally said, hey, plants kind of figured some stuff out. Let's go. And it took a very long time, but, hibernation in cold environments. Some creatures, like snakes, will actually go into hibernation. You might go, well, what about bears? They're actually semi-hibernators. They do hibernate, but not totally. Like a lot of reptiles go into true hibernation, and bears are kind of like a pseudo-hibernation. I know we've been taught bears sleep during the winter, which I'm down with, but they actually do get up and stretch their legs every so often and then go right back to bed. So occasionally they get up and do something and then go back to bed. But so that's why they're not considered true hibernators, but they're kind of pseudo hibernators. Estivation is basically the hibernation, but in dry, hot environments. It's actually why humans that live in extremely hot environments actually have siestas in the middle of the day, because it's just too hot to do anything. So they literally split their day into morning when it's cool and night when it's cool to get all the work done. And that's how entire civilizations actually rose up and why the siesta existed, because it was just too hot to do anything. So nobody was going to force anything. So therefore, you go home, have lunch, take a nice nap, wake up refreshed, and go out and work in the cool of the afternoon, and then stay up, with your family for a while, and then go back to bed and wake up early because you had that nice siesta. You don't need to sleep as long, and that's why some humans have a double sleeping pattern, because they lived in dry, hot environments, and you can't get anything done in the middle of the day when outside is burning. And so are you. So animals that hibernate or estivate enter a stage known as torpor, and this is a condition where their metabolic rate is significantly lowered and enables the animal to wait until the environment is better to support its survival. So FYI, siestas were not because they were lazy, it was because they were using their time wisely, because when it's so stinking hot, you can't do anything. So anyway, let's talk about water. Remember again, so this is temperature, water. Water is required by all living things. It's critical for cellular processes, which was hopefully covered in Biology 111. Since terrestrial organisms lose water to the environment, we have adapted many ways to retain water. Again, we went over this in the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom extensively. The plant kingdom had the waxy cuticles and their stomas with their guard cells that open and close their stomas. And animals have scales and skin and pores, and try to avoid burning themselves like a crisp in the sun or, popping out at other times. So we have a ton of animal adaptations and plant adaptations to make sure that we can survive and not lose all our water. Because again, remember, we are oceans unto ourselves, and we still carry our ocean ancestry with us on the inside. And the last thing we want is to dry up. So go drink some water right now. Hydrate. It's good for you. All right, so when we take this together, we take the temperature, we take the water, and we basically sit there and say, what's going on here? So, important influence on plant production. Oh, remember, production, this is primary productivity. So if you look at food webs and food pyramids, food webs. Anyway, the amount of organic matter available as net primary productivity, which everybody eats. So it's an estimation of all the organic matter available as food. And that's based on temperature and water. Your net primary productivity that runs ecology is based on temperature and water. So that also is calculated as total amount of carbon fixed per year. Remember, plants fix a ton of carbon for us, which is good. So that way we can capture it and reuse it and make biomolecules. Because what's the background of every piece of chemistry inside of you? Carbon. So anyway, minus the amount of oxidized during cellular respiration in terrestrial environments, net primary productivity is estimated by measuring the above ground biomass, which is really hard when you do roots. It does exclude roots. The reason is root biomass is extremely difficult to measure because depending on the plant species, roots can either be doing everything or just a bit. And that's even in the same species. So we exclude everything from the ground up, not the ground below, because that biomass is just a headache to thunk out, so we don't thunk it. Saves ourselves a bit of thunking. Anyway. So, this means a large percentage of biomass that exists underground is not included in this measurement. Net primary productivity is an important variable when considering differences in biomes and how productive they are, or just how active they are, how many species are living there. So, very productive biomes have a very high level of above ground biomass. Think tropical rainforest. That vegetation is thick with like 3 C's or something, as the kids tell me. So, again, we have a lot of cycles happening. So carbon cycle, we've talked about. Nitrogen cycle, again, thank you fungi, thank you bacteria, because without the bacteria and the fungi, we wouldn't have nitrogen cycle, and nitrogen would not be available to us to make proteins and enzymes. Because remember, nitrogen is primarily in proteins and enzymes, and we need proteins and enzymes to not only be the building blocks of our physicality, structurally speaking, but also to run all the biochemistry and make it go faster, so we're not sitting around going, when is that DNA gonna, make itself? And your body's like, Water cycle, oxygen cycle, carbon cycle is a big one. So all these these 5 cycles are huge in maintaining the biosphere, so that way everything is moving and grooving. Again, so now we're going to get into the biomes, or as I like to call, hey, look, it's Minecraft, but not really, because I like playing Minecraft. And now that I've seen the movie, I have to sing la 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 lava, chicken. All right, moving on, sorry. All right, so we have a ton of types of biomes, and there's actually in-betweens for each of these biomes, too. So we're going to do the big ones. But keep in mind, biomes just don't, it's not like, visiting another state where it says, welcome to Tennessee. You're now leaving North Carolina, now entering South Carolina. Stuff like that. We don't have a line between, hi, welcome to the rainforest, and hi, welcome to the temperate zone. There's usually gradients in between, and even those are biomes. So we're going to do the big biomes that we have identified as the big biomes, but keep in mind there's a lot of in-betweens these biomes that are also biomes. So smaller biomes, but just as important, especially like swamps. Swamps are huge, very important. So anyway, biome is a large geographical area characterized by certain types of plants and animals. It is defined as a complex interaction of plants and animals with the climate, geology, rock formations, soil types, water resources, latitude, temperature, position north or south on the globe of an area. So these are big chunks. So let's go ahead. We're going to start from the very cold and go to the very warm. Or hot, depending on how you want to look at that. So cold, if we're starting up in the mountain range, very tall mountain range, not necessarily our mountain ranges, because the the Blue Ridge Mountains are kind of old, so they've been weathered down very much. That's why ours, Blue Ridge is actually the oldest bunch of mountains in the world. And that's why they're so low and chill and compacted and not very seismically active. I mean, we still get earthquakes, but not like, out west. So, anyway. So, tundra is a treeless area between ice cap and tree line of Arctic regions, usually having permanently frozen subsoil, permafrost, and supporting low-growing vegetation, such as lichens, mosses, and stunted shrubs. And that's why reindeer actually are bosses at eating these things. They can eat it and be cool, and we'd be looking at it going, ew. Very little precipitation. It's kind of like a reverse desert in some instances, but not as bad. So then from there is the taiga, which is subarctic. It's evergreen coniferous forests of subarctic lands covering vast areas of northern North America and Eurasia. This is basically where I was raised in upstate New York. So I know about being covered in pine trees and being covered in pine sap, which I hate. Anyway, so it's located south of the tundra and the coniferous forest, which is basically our temperate zone that we're going to be talking about, where we're at. So dominated by firs and spruces, also called the northern coniferous forest. Yeah. Also, a lot of shipping yards came out of this group because of our friends, the firs and the spruces. So if you wanted to see old, shipping yards, why they're up in Pennsylvania and other places up north, it's because they had the tree population up there, very dense forests that was really good for making ships. So you find a lot of old shipyards back when we had wooden sailing vessels there. Next up is a temperate deciduous forest. That's us. Da, 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 da. So anyway, the northern and southern hemispheres, latitudes below 50 degrees, we have 4 distinct seasons. Again, Hendersonville is known as the city of 4 seasons, and they're not wrong. The precipitation from 75 to 150 centimeters per year. Keep in mind, we're probably on the further upland because, again, like I said, our mountains are more closer to a tropical rainforest than a deciduous forest. We're that weird in between. Remember when I said there's biomes that are kind of in betweeny? We're one of those weird spots that we're kind of in between a deciduous forest and a rainforest. So we're freaks like that, I guess. We're just special. So anyway, temp range below freezing to 30 degrees Celsius. So, a comfortable life. Unless it's like 100 and something outside and you're all going, ugh. Anyway, rainforest and so tropical rainforest. Again, it's around the equator. These are around the equator unless you're sitting in our mountains going, gosh, we're weird. And very lush green plants. Lots of ecological communities. Tons of rainfall. Constant temp. Hot and humid. Greenhouse-like. Very nice. Especially if you like drinking the atmosphere. Very humid. Now, into the hotlands. That's hot but less water. So this is like more water and hot. This is grassland. This is temperate and tropical regions. We have it. Hello, Midwest. Before we cut it all up and then got the Dust Bowl because we removed all the sod, which was all the roots, to the grassland. And that's why we had the Dust Bowl, which did not help at the situation. So, the grassland, cutting it up, ripping it up, and turning it into farmland was a huge, or at least at the rate that we did it, because we invented, motorized plows. Yeah, that was not a good time for anyone. Anyway, so, 25 to 75 centimeters of rain a year. They have a dry season, they have a wet season, so they basically have this kind of, these two seasons, that's about it. They have this extensive root system called sod. Again, if you rip up all that sod, the ground underneath has nothing left, and if the wind kicks up, then you've got a dust storm of epic proportions. And that even kills what you've tried to grow. So it makes great farming areas because it's already set up and the soil's nice and rich because the grassland was actually maintaining everything. But the minute you rip it all up, go back and check out the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. That's because we cut up our own grasslands to turn it into farming areas, because it does make really good farming. But when the soil is loose, from being tampered down and held together by the root systems called sod, and we ripped up all the sod, yeah, that wasn't so hot, and that's basically why the Dust Bowl happened, and it contributed greatly to the Great Depression here in America. So, welcome to history. Here's where ecology kicked us on the rear end. So, deserts. A region so arid because of little rainfall, supports only sparse and widely spaced vegetation or no vegetation at all, less than 25 centimeters of rain per year. Usually it's covered with gravel or sand. And we have ours. Another place I'm not entirely terribly thrilled about going and visiting anytime soon. Very deserty. There you go. Don't have much on that one. So again, while it may seem like terrestrial biomes have distinct boundaries due to their differences, they grade into each other for long stretches, which is known as an ecotone. So it's not like in Minecraft. If you've ever played Minecraft and you're walking along and you're in a forest biome and all of a sudden, boop, you hit the desert biome, there's a line and you can clearly see. In real life on the planet, we have ecotones, which is that area space where it gradually blends into each other and kind of its own mini biomes. So that's what an ecotone is. There's also vertical layers to terrestrial biomes. So again, as I said, 3D space here, guys. You can't just think, one way. You've got to think up too. Like, for instance, if you take a rainforest, you got the forest floor, and this is where bacteria, fungi, insects. Actually, if you've ever seen army ants, this is where army ants run this is why they tell you if you're somewhere in a rainforest, when you go to sleep, string up, kind of like a hammock or something, and don't sleep on the ground, because you might not be there in the morning. And that would be because of army ants and other things. So anyway, a lot of recycling down here. The understory is dark and gloomy, shielded from the weather from above. It's a good nursery for young saplings, and there's a lot of different things up in here. The canopy, this is between 50 and 90% of a rainforest species all live in the canopy. They get nice shade, so they're not directly in the sun, and they've got shade, and they got a lot of food, and you got a lot of, just running around up in here. So the canopy. And the emergent layer is the tallest and oldest trees stand watch. They're the ones up next to the sun, not like physically, but, reaching the tallest. And is a habitat for a lot of birds and primate species up here. They can dip down into the canopy when a big predator flying around coming down here, and they can pop back up again. So, again, a lot of biomes are not just one thing. There's layers to them as well. So just keep that in mind. All right, aquatic biomes. Now, aquatic biomes we do have there's about 3, but they're very varied in themselves. So keep in mind, we're really generalizing here, okay? So the types of aquatic ecosystems, there's the freshwater ecosystem, which is either you got standing water or moving water. Standing water is lakes and ponds. And some lakes act more like oceans, like our Great Lakes. They act more like an ocean than they do a lake. Which is, again, it depends on each one of these guys. Even though we kind of lump them all together into freshwater systems, some of these guys can act a whole lot more like somebody else. So it's kind of interesting. Transitional communities are estuaries, wetlands, bogs, fens, swamps, and marshes. I actually was trained under 2 professors that would argue whether the swamps in our mountains were bogs or fens. And oh my gosh, they would get into such scream fights at each other over it. You'd think, no, they'd be professionals. Oh, no. It was funny, but then again, I think the biology people egged them on a bit. So, Yeah, I got a front row seat to two professors fighting over whether our swamps are bogs or fens. Now, do I know if they're bogs or fens? No, that's not my deal, and I wasn't about to even stick my silly foot into that mess. No. And then there's the marine ecosystem, which is shorelines, barrier islands, coral reefs, open ocean. And even with open ocean, it's different depending on what's going on there. So even though we kind of lump these into the freshwater transitional, which is in between fresh and salt, and marine, they're just as wild and varied as anybody else. And crazy. So let's go over some of the freshwater facts. So these are usually characterized by a salt concentration of less than 1%. They're very closely linked to the soil in which the freshwater is in. So keep in mind, especially with rivers and streams, they're always moving the soil around. So that's a major thing, is always looking at the soil composition of what's going, where it's passing through, because that has a major influence on what you're going to find living in the freshwater. They also are influenced by patterns in the speed of water flow and the climate to which the biome is exposed. So, hot, warm, is it going to smell like a pile of algae in the spring when the temperatures pop and all of a sudden you go, and then you're like, why does it smell like nasty? It's because the algae's going crazy, that's why. Marine, and this is where I'm going to talk about the different zones. And again, here's another example of 3D going on here. So remember, this is the largest biome. It covers 3/4 of the Earth's surface, and in it itself is so crazy subdivided because of where a light reaches it and where the light doesn't reach it. It is the most stable of temperatures. Again, reason why the ocean was such a great place for life to go into a gazillion million different versions is because stable temperatures, they didn't have to fight gravity. Water and oxygen were right there because oxygen dissolves in water. And, we weren't being burnt up by the sun. Yay! And food was pumped out of the, all the vents down at the bottom. Yay! And ocean upwelling moved it all around. Yay! So that's, why the ocean is the cradle of life, literally, for everything alive on Earth. And why some of us went back going, yeah. Anyway, so, again, you've got the continental shelf and beaches and whatnot, and then it dumps off, and we have the part where light actually can get down into. It's called the photic zone. And then you've got the aphotic zone, which is bigger than the photic zone, where there is no sunlight, period. And you got the pelagic zone, the benthic zone, and if you go past a certain type, you get into the abyssal zone or the midnight zone, which is no light, no nothing, and it is kind of our big... We have not really explored down here as much as we'd like because of the pressure of the water. It basically would take us and go like, a drunk guy with an empty beer can in their forehead. We all had that one uncle. Actually, no, it wasn't my uncle. Anyway, my uncle's actually kind of straight-laced. But still, long story short, so, yeah, we're still figuring out how the abyssal zone does all the things that the abyssal zone does. Because we've found some pretty freaky creatures down there. Anyway, that have accidentally come back up. And again, because they actually can't take they live in such pressure that they come up to the top, they die because it's not enough pressure for them to live, so they die. So anyway... So even the ocean has several levels to it, and depending on how this is moving around and how the food is moving around, we can find in the photic zone is basically where we get photosynthetic life. But again, thanks to the ocean upwell, it kind of moves the ocean around and whatnot, so that way we can get food moving around and stuff. But there's like huge swaths of the ocean where there's not much going on. And then you get down into the deep areas, and there's some crazy stuff going down there. We're still learning that. So again, this is where we have food chains and food webs. Again, the basic food chain consists of the sun, that powers everything, which is used by a producer, which is a plant, which is then eaten by a first level consumer, which is an herbivore or an omnivore. which is then eaten by a second level consumer, which is a carnivore or an omnivore, and then finally dies and decays and is returned to the soil by decomposers such as bacteria or fungi. So, now, in oceans and whatnot, we can get food webs that are absolutely nuts. Now, food webs on land are actually easier to figure out than food webs in freshwater. I'm not kidding you. Figuring out a food web, you need a 3D computer to help you because it's really interconnected, which is why when we're worried about stream health and fishing and everything, if you're into fishing and you want to go into work in fisheries and whatnot, this is a big thing, especially in freshwater ecology and learning about the food webs that are going on in there. It is extremely complex, more complex than the ones on land. And this is, to make sure everything's balanced, it's very fine-tuned. And if something gets in that should not be in that system, it will mess things up. And not just for people who want to go fishing, but for everything. So that's why we have to be careful with that. So there you go. That's the intro to ecology. Remember, it all boils down to temperature and water. What temperature range do you have? How much water are you getting? Will equal how much biomass you can produce and support. And granted, ecology, it goes into so much more. This was just an intro. So again, if you're interested, take an ecology class. It's actually really interesting to get into a lot of this stuff. And thank you. Let me see if there's anything more. I don't think so.
For the last 38 episodes.
There's just Hank. But anyway, so thank you so much for taking this course with me. I hope you had an enjoyable time. I hope you learned something. And I believe your final will be next week. And I'll put up some more study guides for it. But thank you again for taking my course. I hope you had a good time. And and I hope in the future, I wish you the best of luck with all your future endeavors. And that, even if you're not going to continue with biology, that's fine. Just, know that it is a fascinating subject. And I hope you can take something away from this, because it is pretty much a lot of aspects of biology are connected to so much that we do that even you think, this has nothing to do with that. And in reality, sometimes it does. And sometimes the inverse. If you take more ecology, there's actually a thing that insurance companies came up with that ecologists went, and stole. So yeah, sometimes even, outside of biology, somebody comes up with a really good math equation and then ecologists go, we could use that here. So it's an interesting cycle. So again, thank you so much. Have a good one. And hopefully, maybe one day we'll see each other again. Take it easy. Bye.